Some films are designed to win, built by studios, polished by committees, carried by stars. And then there are the others, the ones that were never meant to work, the ones born from chaos, made by accident, or saved by desperation. In Hollywood, success usually follows a formula. Big names, clean scripts, tested endings. But every so often, something slips through the cracks. A film made in defiance of the system. Too strange, too risky, too small. It shouldn't exist. And yet, when the smoke clears, it's the one still standing. These are the stories of creative rebellion, the projects shot on borrowed cameras, written in panic, edited on no sleep. Films that nearly collapsed mid-production, that studios tried to bury, that critics dismissed before watching. But somehow, each one found a heartbeat strong enough to outlast the noise. In Hollywood, success usually follows a formula. Big names, clean scripts, tested endings. But every so often, something slips through the cracks. A film made in defiance of the system. Too strange, too risky, too small. It shouldn't exist. And yet, when the smoke clears, it's the one still standing. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was luck, or maybe chaos is cinema's most honest collaborator. Because when everything goes wrong, something real can still emerge. This isn't a story about perfection, it's a story about persistence, about failure turned inside out, about lightning caught in a bottle when no one was looking. Let's take a look behind the myths, behind the mistakes, behind the miracles at 15 action movies that shouldn't have worked, but did. Fact 1. El Mariachi, 1992. It began with a man, a dream, and a hospital bed. In 1992, Robert Rodriguez was 23 years old and broke. Hollywood wasn't waiting for him, so he made his own way in. To fund his first film, he volunteered for paid medical experiments, his blood financing his vision. The result was El Mariachi, a $7,000 action movie shot in small Mexican towns with non-actors, borrowed props, and a camera held together with duct tape. There were no permits, no sound team, and no safety crew. Gunshots were created with condoms filled with fake blood. Dialogue was dubbed after shooting. Every frame was built from willpower. Rodriguez thought it would go straight to local video stores. Instead, a Columbia Pictures executive found the tape and saw something raw, a pulse, a style, a filmmaker who made chaos look cinematic. El Mariachi didn't just launch a career, it rewrote the blueprint for independent filmmaking. A movie made for pennies became a global phenomenon. It wasn't about money, it was about momentum. A young director, armed with nothing but grit, accidentally started a revolution. And soon, another man would do the same with speed, fury, and a wasteland for a backdrop. Fact 2. Mad Max 1979. Before Mad Max became legend, it was madness. George Miller, a former doctor with no formal film training, wanted to make a movie about survival on the open road. With a tiny crew, a budget under $400,000, and an untested actor named Mel Gibson, he set out to film an apocalypse without special effects or permission. The team shut down real roads, borrowed cars, and fueled explosions with real gasoline. Some stunts were performed without safety nets. The danger wasn't simulated, it was captured. Every roar of an engine, every scream of tires, felt authentic because it was. The production was chaos, but Miller turned the chaos into rhythm. The film's intensity wasn't built in post-production, it was born in the dust and heat of the Australian desert. Mad Max went on to earn over $100 million, becoming one of the most profitable films of all time relative to its cost. Its influence echoed through every chase, crash, and explosion that came after. The irony? American distributors redubbed all the voices, thinking the accents were too strange. But no one could mute the sound of something new being born. What began as madness became myth. And next, a filmmaker with no budget but infinite precision would redefine modern combat. Fact 3. The Raid, Redemption, 2011. It was supposed to be practice. It became perfection. Welsh director Gareth Evans moved to Indonesia to film documentaries. While there, he discovered Pencak Silat, a martial art so fast and brutal it seemed cinematic by nature. He wanted to capture it on film, but with no funding, he settled for a small, contained story about a police raid gone wrong. Shot for just over $1 million in a real building, the raid turned limitation into art. The plot was simple, a SWAT team trapped inside an apartment complex run by killers. But Evans Villains used every wall, stairwell, and hallway like a weapon. Fights were filmed in long takes. The choreography was merciless. Actors performed full-contact combat with precision honed through endless rehearsal. There were no digital tricks, only sweat, blood, and rhythm. When the film premiered, critics called it pure action distilled. It was raw, relentless, and impossible to ignore. The Raid became the new standard for close-quarters fighting, influencing Hollywood for years to come. It wasn't meant to be iconic, but art doesn't always ask for permission, and somewhere in America, another quiet man was about to turn grief into legend. Fact hash 4. John Wick, 2014. Every story of revenge begins with a loss. This one began with a dog. By 2014, Keanu Reeves had been written off as a relic of another era. Too quiet, too detached, too 1,990 seconds. Then came John Wick, a low-budget script about a retired hitman seeking vengeance after his puppy is killed. It sounded absurd. Studios laughed. But Reeves saw truth in the simplicity. He trained for months, working with two former stuntmen, Chad Stahelski and David Leitch, who had never directed before. Together, they invented a new cinematic grammar: smooth, wide shots, long takes, choreography treated as ritual. The result was Gun Fu violence filmed with grace and control. The world of John Wick was strange and intoxicating. Assassins bound by codes, hotels run by killers, and an economy built on blood. It felt like noir mythology told through muzzle flashes. The movie opened modestly but spread like wildfire. Critics praised its clarity, audiences embraced its discipline, and Reeves, once written off, became immortal all over again. It shouldn't have worked. It was too simple, too small, too quiet. But like Wick himself, it refused to stay buried. And decades earlier, another wounded soldier would fight to stay alive, both on screen and off. Fact hash 5. First Blood, 1982. Long before Rambo became a symbol of unstoppable force, he was a man collapsing under his own weight. First Blood wasn't born in Hollywood's golden light, it came from its shadows. The script was rejected for years. Too grim, too heavy, too real. When Sylvester Stallone finally took the role, he demanded a rewrite, removing most of the dialogue, reshaping Rambo into a haunted man of few words. The film's original ending had Rambo die by suicide. Stallone fought to change it, believing the character deserved survival over martyrdom. That one change saved not just the story, but a generation's idea of the action hero. First Blood wasn't patriotic, and it wasn't loud. It was about trauma, alienation, and what happens when war doesn't end inside the soldier. It shocked audiences by being small, personal, and human. It made millions, spawned a franchise, and created a myth. But the first film was never meant to glorify violence, it was meant to survive it. The irony? The studio almost shelved it after hating the first cut. Stallone had to fight to save the film just like Rambo fought to save himself. And a decade later, another impossible idea, a bus that couldn't stop, would rewrite adrenaline. Fact hash 6. Speed, 1994. At first, it sounded like a punchline, a bus rigged to explode if it drops below 50 miles per hour. That was Speed, a film no one believed in. The premise was ridiculous. The budget was small, but director Jan de Bont, a first-time filmmaker and veteran cinematographer, saw elegance in absurdity. He knew that tension doesn't need complexity, it needs momentum. Every second, every cut, every engine rev built toward panic. Keanu Reeves ditched his surfer image, playing a calm, methodical hero who fought logic as much as danger. Sandra Bullock, then unknown, became the film's beating heart. There was no CGI magic, the stunts were real. When the bus jumped a missing section of freeway, it wasn't green screen, it was an actual bus, ramped and launched. The actor's shock on camera was genuine. The studio nearly ruined it by removing the score. The music was added back 2 weeks before release and turned Speed into pure rhythm. It shouldn't have been smart, but it was. It shouldn't have lasted, but it did. A simple premise became a perfect machine. And next, a man twice his prime would turn vengeance into art. Fact hekje 7. Taken, 2008. Reinvention doesn't always come with youth. Sometimes, it arrives when no one is watching. In 2008, Liam Neeson wasn't supposed to lead an action film. At 56, he was an acclaimed dramatic actor too old for stunts, too serious for spectacle. Taken seemed like a forgettable European thriller, produced on a small budget and shot quickly in Paris. Even Neeson assumed it would go straight to DVD, but one scene changed everything. I will look for you, I will find you, and I will kill you. 18 Seconds of Quiet Fury transformed a modest thriller into a cultural phenomenon. Neeson's calm, controlled rage redefined modern action heroes, not as invincible soldiers, but as ordinary men with unstoppable purpose. Taken earned over $220 million, created a trilogy, and reshaped Neeson's career overnight. The film's success birthed an entire subgenre, middle-aged revenge thrillers, the dad action era. The irony? The studio delayed its US release, thinking it wouldn't connect. But audiences around the world saw something real, a man who had nothing left but conviction. Sometimes, all it takes is one line to rewrite destiny. And in another film, death itself would become the teacher. Fact Hashite. Edge of Tomorrow, 2014. It's rare for a movie to fail at first, and then succeed by dying again. Edge of Tomorrow looked doomed before it began. Its title confused audiences. Its marketing failed to explain the concept. Even the cast wasn't sure how to describe it. But behind the chaos was one of the most inventive action films of the decade. Tom Cruise played Major William Cage, a coward forced to relive the same day over and over in a war against alien invaders. Emily Blunt, as Rita Vrataski, the Angel of Verdun, trained him, killed him, and taught him to fight. Every loop was a failure. Every failure, a lesson. Doug Liman's direction turned repetition into rhythm. Each reset felt sharper, funnier, and more precise than the last. Yet the studio didn't know how to market intelligence disguised as action. The film underperformed in theaters, only to be rediscovered on home release under its tagline, Live, Die, Repeat. What began as confusion became cult reverence. The twist? The title that nearly killed the film became the phrase that saved it. Failure was its blueprint. Persistence was its weapon. And long before that, another film had already taught us to question what was real and what was code. Fact #9. The Matrix, 1999. No one expected philosophy to look this cool. When The Matrix entered development, few understood it. Studio executives couldn't decipher the script. What is The Matrix, they asked. The Wachowskis answered by filming it. Blending cyberpunk aesthetics, martial arts, and metaphysics, they trained their cast for months before rolling a single frame. Keanu Reeves learned kung fu and wire fu choreography until movement itself became meaning. The result wasn't just action, it was evolution. The now iconic bullet time sequence Neo dodging gunfire as the camera orbited in slow motion wasn't CGI magic. It was engineering. Dozens of still cameras firing in perfect sync. The effect changed cinema forever. When The Matrix premiered, audiences saw something they didn't have words for. It felt familiar yet foreign mythology rendered in latex and philosophy. The twist? The studio had nearly cut funding until the Wachowskis shot a single action scene, the Lobby Massacre, to prove they could do it. That scene saved the movie, the franchise, and the future of science fiction. It shouldn't have worked. But it didn't just work, it reprogrammed the genre, and after that, one film would abandon logic entirely and find power in chaos. Fact Hassan Zero. Crank. 2006. If adrenaline had a soundtrack, this film was it. In 2006, Crank exploded onto screens like a fever dream. Jason Statham played a hitman poisoned with a synthetic drug that would kill him the moment his heart slowed down. The premise was insane, the execution even more so. Directors Mark Neveldine and Brian Taylor threw out every filmmaking rulebook. They filmed handheld, on rollerblades, hanging off motorcycles, racing through traffic with cameras tied to their bodies. The result was chaos deliberate, controlled chaos. Crank was less a movie than an experience, a first-person panic attack. The pace never broke, the editing never rested, and the tone never apologized. Critics were divided. Some called it trash, others genius. But audiences couldn't look away. Statham did many of his own stunts, pushing himself past what most actors would attempt. The energy was real, the danger constant. It was reckless, absurd, unforgettable. The twist? The film that was too weird for theaters became a cult icon, spawning a sequel even wilder than the first. Crank shouldn't have existed, but it proved that even madness can have rhythm. And from chaos, a new kind of order would rise from the ruins of a failed dream. Fact Hassono. District 9, 2009. Sometimes the best films are born from what's left behind. When the Halo movie fell apart, its young director, Neil Blomkamp, was left with unused designs, an abandoned crew, and a shattered dream. Peter Jackson, instead of walking away, gave him $30 million and complete creative freedom. What emerged was District 9, a sci-fi action film that looked like a documentary and hit like a mirror. Shot on location in Johannesburg, it replaced polished sets with slums and replaced heroes with bureaucrats. The aliens weren't invaders, they were refugees, and the story's villain, Wikus van der Merwe, slowly transformed into one of them body first, then soul. Blomkamp used handheld cameras, improv performances, and visual effects created with leftover Halo assets. The film felt dirty, real, and disturbingly human. Audiences around the world saw something they hadn't before, a science fiction film that felt like news footage. District 9 earned 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and became a classic overnight. The irony? It came from the ashes of a canceled blockbuster. Sometimes failure just needs a different lens, and that lens would soon turn inward to the eyes of the audience itself. Fact Hasson 2. Hardcore Henry, 2015. What if you could be the camera? That's what Hardcore Henry asked, and then dared to answer. In 2015, Russian musician Ilya Naishuller decided to make the first full-length action film shot entirely in first person. No professional cinematographers, no Hollywood system, just GoPros mounted on helmets, strapped to stuntmen running, fighting, bleeding, and falling through the chaos. The film followed a man who wakes up from death, enhanced by technology, and fights through armies to save his wife. But the story wasn't the point, the experience was. The camera never blinked. You saw every punch, every bullet, every drop of blood. Financed partly through Indiegogo, Hardcore Henry was as independent as action cinema gets. Critics were split. Some called it groundbreaking, others called it nauseating, but no one could deny it was something new. It felt like being inside a video game, trapped and exhilarated at once. The twist? Naishuller filmed many scenes himself, sprinting and crashing alongside his actors. It was as much an act of endurance as direction. It shouldn't have worked, but it rewired how audiences could feel action. And from a faceless perspective, another masked hero was waiting to reclaim his own. Fact Hasson 3. Dredd, 2012. Sometimes the best way to tell a story is to strip it bare. After the disaster of Judge Dredd, 1995, no one wanted to hear that name again. Hollywood had turned the brutal anti-hero into a joke. But in 2012, a quiet reboot appeared, small budget, little marketing, no ego. Carl Urban took the lead and made a vow. The helmet never comes off. It was a decision that turned anonymity into power. His face stayed hidden, but his performance carried weight, every word cold, every gesture deliberate. Filmed in South Africa, Dredd leaned on tight corridors and relentless momentum. Its use of high-speed phantom cameras during slow-mo sequences transformed violence into something hypnotic, blood suspended like glitter, chaos moving in rhythm. The film bombed theatrically, buried by poor promotion. But in the aftermath, it grew a cult legend passed between fans who recognized its purity. No bloat, no vanity, no compromises. The irony? A faceless film became one of the most authentic expressions of identity in modern action. It whispered when others screamed, and audiences eventually heard it. And next came a movie that shouted, bled, and laughed in the face of the superhero myth. Fact Hasson 4. Kick-Ass, 2010. Not all heroes are born with destiny. Some are just bored. In 2010, Kick-Ass kicked the door open on a genre that had forgotten how to surprise. No powers, no prophecies. Just a kid in a green wetsuit who decides to fight crime and immediately gets beaten half to death. Studios refuse to touch it. Too violent. Too foul, too much truth. So director Matthew Vaughn funded it himself, filming in secrecy, with no promise of release. The result was part comedy, part tragedy, and entirely chaos. Chloe Grace Moretz's hit girl became the lightning rod, an 11-year-old assassin who swore like a sailor and fought like a symphony. Her scenes sparked outrage, awe, and debate all at once. Audiences loved it, critics were divided, but Kick-Ass made nearly $100 million, proving the superhero formula could bleed and still breathe. The irony? The movie mocked the genre it ended up saving. It was crude, violent, and honest, and that honesty changed everything. And finally, one old warrior would return for his last battle, not to conquer, but to close the book. Fact Hasson 5. Rambo, Last Blood, 2019. You can retire the man, but not the war. By 2019, Rambo had already survived his time. The world had moved on, but Sylvester Stallone hadn't. With Last Blood, he didn't try to outdo the past, he tried to bury it. The film finds Rambo alone, living on a quiet ranch, haunted by ghosts he can't name. When his surrogate daughter is kidnapped, peace gives way to wrath. The violence that follows isn't grand, it's surgical, grim, and deeply personal. Critics called it outdated, cruel, excessive, but that was the point. Rambo wasn't meant to evolve, he was meant to fade. The tunnels beneath his land became his last battleground, a physical echo of the trauma he never escaped. The film earned modestly, but left something behind a scar that felt final. The twist? Last Blood wasn't closure for audiences, it was closure for Stallone. The myth ended where it began, a man at war with himself. It shouldn't have worked, but like Rambo, it refused to die quietly. Bonus fact: Equilibrium. 2002. Some films fail because they come too early. Equilibrium was one of them. Released quietly in 2002, it arrived just after The Matrix and was dismissed as a cheap imitation. Black coats, gunfights, dystopia. Everyone thought they had seen it before, but beneath the surface was something else, a meditation on what happens when a world decides emotion is the enemy. Christian Bale played John Preston, a government enforcer in a regime that bans art, love, and feeling. Every day, he hunts down beauty and burns it. Until, one day, he hesitates, and that hesitation changes everything. Director Kurt Wimmer didn't have money or marketing, but he had vision. He created a new form of action, gun kata, a hybrid of martial arts and geometry, turning gunfire into dance, violence into symmetry. It looked absurd. It looked genius. It was both. The movie disappeared at the box office, making less than $1 million. But time has a way of correcting silence. Equilibrium resurfaced years later, whispered about in forums, rediscovered by fans who found poetry in its precision. It wasn't a blockbuster, it was a secret. The twist? The film about suppressing emotion became one of the most quietly emotional cult classics of its time. In a world obsessed with control, Equilibrium reminded us that sometimes the most dangerous act is to feel. So maybe greatness doesn't come from control, it comes from collapse. Every film on this list broke something, a rule, a limit, a belief. None of them were supposed to survive. And yet, each one carved its name into history, not through perfection but persistence. They weren't designed to win awards. They were made by people who refused to stop, directors who gambled everything, actors who had nothing left to prove, crews who turned accidents into miracles. Maybe that's why these stories endure, because they remind us that art isn't born from certainty, it's born from chaos, from instinct, from the refusal to quit. Tell us, which one of these failures do you think changed cinema the most?